Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on behalf of my colleagues at the Sam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar where we will be discussing the domestic and regional impact of the results of the Turkish general elections in 2023. One of the main objectives, actually, of this webinar is to highlight Turkey's central role in the Middle East. We'll see how President Erdogan's consolidation of power in Turkey after the elections will shape the country's foreign policy towards Syria and its also immediate neighborhood, the Gulf and beyond. Moreover, we will be also raising key questions regarding the post-election domestic dynamics in Turkey and its impact on the regional developments. We're happy to have with us Professor Ahmed Uysel, the director of Orsam Center for Middle Eastern Studies from Ankara, and Dr. Sinem Adar, associate at the Center for Applied Turkey Studies at SWP from Berlin. And the other discussions, of course, we'll be having a short Q&A sessions, hence the attendees can also send their questions and comments. Professor Ahmed, I want to start with you. Regarding the media perception before May 14, and also based on the most of the public polls conducted was that the opposition leader, Mr. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, was going to win the presidential race. Some argued that maybe the ongoing financial crisis and the crisis response mechanism after the earthquake would be indicators actually to shift the public support away from President Erdogan. What has been changed and why did these assumptions turn out to be wrong? Why did the majority of Turkish voters actually back President Erdogan?
You hear me well?
Yes.
Yes. The local, of course, situation kind of put the government, our party government, against the odds, but of course, this does not automatically turn into support for the opposition because they miscalculated maybe the national or patriotic rise of Turkish kind of response or reaction. They try to frame it or focus on the economy. Economy is maybe a downside or a disadvantage for the government, but at the same time, the foreign policy was a stronger point, defense sector was a stronger point, and Erdogan, he managed to convince people the priority is not the economy and the national survival, the future of Turkey as a strong country, as an active in the global arena. Just let's remember the grain deal that Turkey mediated between Russia and Ukraine, and Turkey also present in many files, and also security achievements, national automobile, etc. So this kind of gave a pride for national patriotic feelings, and economy of course is important, and we see its impact on the voting trends in the big cities, because the big cities were the hardest hit by economic problems with the inflation and also the rise of rents. But at the end, the public think in a more broader term, not like only economy. And of course, people get also with the interest rate, of course, our main question about economy, the Erdogan government, he made a choice, has to choose between maybe go with the conventional economics, where you have problems, you raise the interest rate, or you lower the interest rate and dynamite or activate the economy. So he chose this line, even though people became maybe poorer, but now at least the unemployment did not rise very much. So people have jobs, maybe they have lower salaries, but this was the choice he made. Looks like he convinced people economy is not the main problem. Is the survival, maybe the future of the country is at stake. Plus, I mean, the opposition candidate Kılıçdaroğlu, he made some mistakes. He said, you know, he accused Russia, and people said, you know, he wants to make a problem with Russia. He said we should support Ukraine, and again, this one was criticized that he's one-sided. He's too much pro-Western, which we don't like. The people like to see Turkey as more independent country in foreign policy and its also other policies. So I think they kind of plus, as I mentioned, Erdogan, he managed to move the agenda, move the discussion away from the economy, more on the international, I mean, stature and the location of Turkey or the position of Turkey in the global arena, with also finding natural gas, finding oil reserves, and other achievements. I think played well with him. And we know internal to Anatolia, which is the backbone of this conservative nationalist votes, I think they dominated the voting system. Their preference, strong support for Erdogan played a role. Even, you know, in the big cities, it was close, but Kılıçdaroğlu was leading even by a fraction. But he was able to compensate this. Maybe last point also with the Kurdish votes. Kurdish votes, I mean, pro-PKK and other parties that's based on Kurdish nationalism, Kurdish identity politics, did not fare well with this more maybe, let's say, conservative nationalist, and some of the Kurds also voted for AK Party, and it is very noticeable that the HDP votes, I mean, decreased in these areas. I mean, not major, but significant decline we see. So maybe another question. Or,
thank you. Moving to Dr. Sinem. Before
yes,
May 14, many experts thought that the Kurds or even the supporters or the voters of the EU party were going to be the kingmakers in deciding who will win the elections. But most of us actually were surprised to see that Mr. Sinan Ogan, a former MP from the Nationalist Movement Party, the MHP, got almost 5% of the votes, and he pushed the elections, the presidential elections, to go for a runoff and channeled his votes in favor of Erdogan. What does Sinem's successful appearance in the election means for Turkish politics? And also here, I want to open a bracket, like, given the fact that Devlet Bahçeli, the leader of the MHP, is getting a bit old, so would Erdogan prefer to seek Sinem's or cooperate with Sinem in the future by offering him maybe a key position in the government?
Thank you so much for the question. Also, thank you for the kind invitation. Great to be here, and also to be on the same panel with Professor Uysal. I'll start with the second part of the question, to which I don't have an answer, unfortunately, because, yeah, possible, but I think time will show how the dynamics will evolve on the ground in terms of those two actors, i.e. Bahçeli and Oğan, who clearly, I mean, just for the audience, a little bit of the background information, Sinan Oğan, who was the candidate of the third alliance, ATA alliance, he actually comes from within the ultra-nationalist Action Party, so MHP, who is now led by Devlet Bahçeli. And before I basically go into Sinan Oğan's role, I think it's also important to emphasize that the high vote share of the MHP in this election was also rather an unexpected thing before the election. So MHP, the ultra-nationalist ally of Mr. Erdogan, unlike contrary to many expectations, got 10.2% of the votes in the parliament. So that's an interesting rise, actually. And in a way, by doing that, MHP now also in a way positioned itself as the main representative of the nationalist movement in Turkey, out of which two parties came out, both İYİ Parti, Meral Akşener's İYİ Parti back in 2017, and later in 2020, Ümit Özdağ, who founded the Victory Party, and who was before a member of MHP, then founded İYİ Parti with Meral Akşener in 2020, left İYİ Parti and founded Victory Party. So in a way, this is all an indication of the constant and continuous fragmentation of the nationalist movement party, which led to a significant, in my opinion, competition among these different actors. But after all, it looks like Devlet Bahçeli and his MHP was able to kind of not only increase the vote share of the party, but also position the party as at the center of the nationalist, the grey wolf movement. Now back to Sinan Oğan. Now I guess, first of all, I don't personally think that he was the kingmaker, because the king was already there. So you don't need someone to make the king a king. But I think it's important to understand why he got 5% of the vote in the first round. And that has to do, in my opinion, 3 points. One is that a significant, not so negligible portion of the population was and is not happy with Erdogan's People Alliance. They are, however, also not happy with what the opposition offered. They didn't basically see the Nations Alliance, Kılıçdaroğlu's Nation Alliance, as an alternative. Therefore, Sinan Oğan's supporters were first and foremost neither pro-Cumhur Alliance and Mr. Erdogan, nor pro-Nations Alliance and Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu. The second dimension, I think, that helped Sinan Oğan attract votes was the rapprochement between Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu's Republican People's Party and the Kurdish left-leaning People's Party, HDP. And last but not least, among a certain segment of Sinan Oğan's voters, there was also a significant discontent because of the fact that former AKP members who later on formed their own parties, such as Ahmet Davutoğlu's Gelecek Party or Ali Babacan's Deva Party, ran through the lists of CHP in the parliamentary elections. Now, I think one thing to emphasize is that Sinan Oğan, up until he joined Mr. Erdogan's People Alliance, he was very consistently defined himself as a nationalist who adhered to the secularist principles of Kemalist revolution, so to speak. So I think that's kind of like the background against which some of the voters of Sinan Oğan were really unhappy with that rapprochement between the CHP and former AKP members who later on founded their own parties. But if you look at the vote share, and I might be wrong here, I basically looked at it very quickly, but you see that actually Sinan Oğan's vote didn't go to one candidate or the other as a whole, mainly because of the fact that I think the vote, he didn't have a kind of a consolidated voter base. Basically, people were voting for Sinan Oğan for different reasons. And it's interesting because there is also a significant regional variation in terms of whom Sinan Oğan's supporters supported in the second round. Now, for instance, if you look at the coastal cities where Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu won majority of the, won more votes than Mr. Erdogan did, there Sinan Oğan's votes seem to went to Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu. In Anatolian cities, it looks like it was kind of divided into two. In some of the cities to the advantage of Mr. Erdogan, but it was more or less like 2.5 or 3 to 2%. It was divided between the two candidates. And interestingly, in the Kurdish cities where the voter turnout actually declined, Oğan's voters seem to have supported Mr. Erdogan. And I think this has to do with kind of like the dissatisfaction with the second dimension that I mentioned, that the rapprochement between the Republican People's Party and the Kurdish HDP. So that's kind of like in a very nutshell, the analysis about Sinan Oğan, why people supported Sinan Oğan, and why and how his votes were divided between two candidates in the second round. But I think one thing to keep in mind, and that will be my last sentence, because when Sinan Oğan is discussed, or like this kind of the nationalist vote is discussed in the context of the elections, there is this term that nationalism is on the rise, or nationalism is the new deep wave. I kind of disagree with the description, because first and foremost, nationalism, Turkey has always been a nationalist. Nationalism has always been strong in Turkey. That's the first point. And the second point is that I think one can only make sense of the rise of Sinan Oğan as a contender in the first round by making sense of what has been happening in Turkey since 2014. Both the sociology and the political landscape of the country since 2014 has been severely shaped by a nationalist discourse. And Professor Uysal mentioned this, that basically in the election campaign as well, we see like references here and there to the defense industry, to the national grandeur, how Turkey has become a very strong country under Erdogan's rule, etc., etc. So in that sense, actually, nationalism is the thing itself. It's not a deep wave or anything. It's like literally the context in which I think the candidates competed. And it looks like one of the strategic mistakes of the opposition is to kind of perhaps not to build the strategy accordingly, I would say, and that seemed to have, and because of that, they seem to have lost votes. Thank you.
Dr. Sinem, want to continue with you and later move again to Professor Ahmed. There was an article published by Nicola Danforth. He's the author of also the book Remaking of Republican Turkey, Memory and Modernity Since the Fall of the Ottoman Empire, which talk about actually the identity politics in Turkey. So in his recent article, he talked about the symbolism of Erdogan's victory, as it also coincides with the 570th anniversary of the Ottoman conquest of Istanbul. But this year also is a centennial, actually, of the establishment of the Turkish Republic. It seems that Erdogan understood the importance of these dates for the Turkish people, and he grasped how effectively they could also be wielded together. How did actually President Erdogan merge Turkish nationalism with religion, that is maybe political Islam, we can say? And do you think that the election results showed that a significant number of the Turkish voters seem to confirm how effectively symbols and narratives can transcend even financial realities?
Thank you. First and foremost, I actually think that, I mean, Mr. Erdogan did it very well, but I don't think it's kind of unique to Mr. Erdogan in the sense that nationalism and religion, since the establishment of the Republic in Turkey, are an intertwined phenomenon, because nationalism itself has a very ethno-religious touch, in the sense that being a Turk, by the founding fathers of the Republic as well, was very much strictly associated with being a Sunni Muslim. So in that sense, that kind of like ethno-religious majoritarian thinking, I think, precedes Mr. Erdogan. But I think what was done, or what Mr. Erdogan did during the election campaign, but again, before the election campaign as well, but Professor Uysal very eloquently described, I think in a way he kind of intertwined positive nationalism with negative nationalism. And by that, I mean the following, that on the one hand, there was a very strong emphasis on the national grandeur and how Turkey has become, quote unquote, a strong Turkey that is able to play hardball in an age of great competition with global powers. Thanks to defense industry, thanks to other things. And on the other hand, he also very effectively used negative nationalism. Again, what Professor Uysal mentioned as kind of associating the CHP with, for instance, CHP's rapprochement with the HDP as support to PKK. And if Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu comes to power, Turkey is going to be kind of lost its territorial integrity, etc., etc. So in a way, he was able, I think the election campaign was able to play with both politics of hope in terms of Turkey becoming even a greater nation that is able to compete with global powers. And at the same time, it also, I think, played quite successfully with kind of a fear politics, if you will. That if the opposition comes to power, Turkey will lose its territorial integrity. And at the same time, of course, one should not forget the fact that Mr. Erdogan and actually many founders of the ruling Justice and Development Party, they themselves come from, in a way, kind of the nationalist and the Islamist networks, the roots of which go back to the Cold War times. And these networks are very much mobilized within society. Therefore, yes, it is about symbols, yes, it is about emotions, but at the same time, it is also about accessing people, being able to mobilize people. And I think what Mr. Erdogan has been doing in the last 2 decades was actually effectively co-opting those already existing networks, strengthening them, expanding them, and if necessary, punishing them if they basically go against the kind of the Mr. Erdogan's will, if you will. And of course, I think the LGBTQ, the discourse about the LGBTQ seems to be also like a quite an effective, I think, a mechanism that kind of played into the fears of people in terms of if the opposition comes to power, Turkey is going to lose the traditional values and the family is going to gone, etc., etc. But without making it too long, I also want to make one final point about the fact that now, I mean, there is, I think, kind of a general or a conventional understanding that economic crises automatically will bring the end of populist authoritarian leaders. And in this election, we saw that it is not the case. But actually, in the history too, for instance, remember Indonesia, Malaysia, during 1997 economic crises, both at the time were run by authoritarian governments. Economic crises brought the end to the authoritarianism in Indonesia, thereby in Malaysia, it didn't. It consolidated authoritarianism. So I think at the end of the day, it is really about the ability of a political actor to consolidate a voter coalition, and that happens by very effective usage of symbols, by playing politics of emotions, but at the same time by also actually playing with the economy, because I think we shouldn't forget the fact that Mr. Erdogan and AKP has been very successful in terms of partisan distribution of economic benefits. Think, for example, in the last 3 years, the number of workers who got insured is 3 million. So 3 million people are insured in the last 3 years in Turkey. So which means that they basically participated into the labor force, with again, Professor Uysal mentioned. So I think that the story seems to be really more complicated than at least I perceived it before the elections. And it looks like, again, even though the population is polarized, at the end of, and Mr. Erdogan, I think, failed to mold the population behind a certain ideological image, he still succeeded in terms of creating a community of Erdogan supporters. You look at your right, you look at your left, everyone is supporting Erdogan, and you are basically living in that community, and you don't want to basically kind of lose the benefits and the privileges that come through that community. So I think that's kind of like, in addition to the symbolism of religion and nationalism, this, I think, kind of like sense of belonging to this community also played an important role in the success of Mr. Erdogan.
To Dr. Sinem. Professor Ahmed, many observers actually commented that despite the fact that Turkey's National Assembly now looks more diverse, featuring members from almost 18 political parties, but also nationalist and conservative forces, both from the ruling alliance and also the opposition, now dominate the parliament. According to the Turkish journalist Fahim Testekim from El Monitor, he argued that the electoral results show an increased nationalist and Islamist orientation among the working class and also the low-income groups in both the urban and rural areas. What will be the implication of these results in Turkey's foreign policy? Will the new parliament actually threaten President Erdogan's hand in new military interventions, maybe against the Kurdish groups in Syria or Iraq, and as well maybe to push Turkey to expand its influence beyond the region?
Yes, the parliament actually, before the elections, many observers were expecting that Erdogan might lose the parliamentary majority and maybe win the presidency, which is also, Turkey is a presidential system now. President has more leverage on the system, and the opposition kind of failed to assure or secure the majority because Kılıçdaroğlu, he gave away some of the seats to get his nomination or supported in the table of six. So they lost the majority. It also created a lot of maybe kind of controversy within the alliance. And he also, I mean, to his credit, we should mention that he almost managed the impossible. Brought Islamists with the Kemalists in his coalition, with the Kurdish nationalists, with the Turkish nationalists, some liberals, some communists also. Very almost impossible coalition, or mission impossible. And he did some job, but this is because so much different impacts. So you give to the Kurdish nationalists, you lose the Turkish nationalists. You give something to like LGBTQ issue, you give it to the liberals, then you lose the Islamists. So this, I think, cost them the parliamentary majority and giving away some of the seats, for free almost, because Davutoğlu and Babacan had no votes in measurable contribution to the main bulk. And at the end, you kind of destroy the motivation of your own committed followers. I think the loss of majority in the parliament, I think, hurt them, even the morale in the second round, because they thought at least we should get the majority, maybe push for a constitutional change or prevent some of the rules, maybe laws being passed. And this time, I think this government will be more consistent, whether you like the outcome or not, but we'll expect less controversy, less political crisis in the system, because the parliament and the presidency will be more in line with each other and aligned with each other. And for the Kurdish votes, of course, we see them, not all the Kurds, as I mentioned, vote for the HDP and pro-PKK. Many Kurds also, Kurds are more conservative people, so the religion also plays a part. Forcing the Kurds, I think HDP also lost because of that, forcing the Kurds behind Kılıçdaroğlu, which is a secular and Alawite. He is a Kurd, but he said, I think to counter the pro-PKK, pro-PYD discourse, he mentioned he's being Alawite, but of course most of the Kurds are Sunnis, and this didn't play well with them. And he then lost some of the Kurds, and even HDP lost some of the conservative Kurds in the voting, which also impacted their dominance in the parliament. Now we see, just the point of Turkey's policies in Iraq and Syria. Turkey is fighting against the PKK, not against the Kurds. And we have also Kurdish refugees in Turkey. I don't know if in Lebanon you have Arab refugees, but we have also Kurdish Syrians running away from the PYD areas. And I think it's not going to change much. This will, make Turkey give them some more power to pressure America to reduce support for the PYD. Iraqi government also not supporting maybe, but not to allow the PKK to work freely in the Iraqi territories, especially in the northern Iraq, KRG region. So the policies, I think, will be going the same line with the same pace, but maybe with a little bit more confidence. But with all respect to Dr. Sinem, she mentioned a couple of times, authoritarianism and kingmaker with the king. I mean, this analogy actually is not very fair, because I mean, you can use it, of course, we can use it as the metaphor, but generally in the Arab context, some non-democratic countries, they wanna claim Erdogan as a sultan or the king. He is not. He is a democratically elected leader, charismatic, true, but we should not confuse with charisma, which I think helped him a lot with his being able to communicate with the majority masses, not like the way the Western media like to depict him. I don't see him as a dictator. He's, dictators don't go for the second round. They win by 99% in the neighborhood we have. I am also an expert on the Middle East, so I had a good chance as a sociologist, good chance to compare. I assume she didn't mean it, but in the Arab context, it is generally misunderstood or misrepresented. Saying, I mean, the Arab intellectuals sometimes try to say that you are not much different from us. We have the kings, you have the kings or sultan, but this is not the case. Turkey proved itself it's a democratic country, and the democratic ballots with all dynamics, with foreign support for Kılıçdaroğlu, publics, maybe some Arabs supported Erdogan and other things, but this is natural in this global context. And so that's the point I want to make. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to facilitate more debate. I also want to remind the audience to insert their questions and comments on the chat box. Dr. Sinem, coming back to you, and want to emphasize more about the Kurdish issue. I mean, coming back to the Kurds, I remember in 2015, it seems during the negotiations between the government and the PKK, it's the Kurdistani Workers' Party, it seems it was clear to President Erdogan that making peace with the PKK would require also a certain degree of power sharing with the Kurds. And this was going to cause him actually politically, as it was going to isolate the nationalists and maybe some generals in the army. At the same time, such a process was going to undermine his plans in Syria in supporting the opposition and preventing the establishment of, let's say, any Kurdish political entity in Syria. After the outcome of the 2023 elections, do you think that Erdogan can risk resetting his policy towards the Kurds, and not just the HDP here, but also the Kurds in Syria? And what kind of political future awaits the Kurds actually in Turkey? Thank you.
Thank you. Before I come to that question, I would quickly like to respond to Professor Uysal. Now, first is, I use the word king with reference to the term kingmaker, so not necessarily referring to Mr. Erdogan as a sultan, because I also don't think that it's a patrimonial regime in the Weberian sense of the term. But at the same time, I agree with you, despite that there were electoral irregularities, at the end of the day, I think the result is it's not basically a completely stolen election. Having said that, the election was neither fair nor free. It wasn't fair because going to the election, even before the election campaign, I mean, 90% of the media is under the control of President Erdogan. There is no separation of powers. It is not free because a lot of political actors, including with, for instance, Selahattin Demirtas, are in jail. İmamoğlu, there was a court case about İmamoğlu. So I think all of these factors should lead us to think and ask the question whether this election was free and fair, and my answer to that is not. Therefore, I think, yes, it is true that Mr. Erdogan has quite often important popular support, and it is very different than other countries in the Middle East, and that's one of the reasons why I think he was also so much liked by the masses around the Middle East, that actually he wins the election and stays in power as such. I acknowledge all of those things, but at the same time, I think it would also be completely misleading to define Turkey as a democratic country at this current time and space. So I think it has quite of the properties of an authoritarian regime at the moment. Now, coming to the question about Kurds, I mean, so I think during the time between 2014 and 2016, two things were happening, one within Turkey, one within Syria, and those are related. Within Turkey, we see that basically President Erdogan, because of the reasons you mentioned, due to the developments that were happening in Syria, mainly in Kobani, we see that, and that also overlaps with the Erdogan's alliance with the Gülenist movement. So we see kind of like a change of allies during the period between 2014 and 2016. And with the change of allies also comes, in a way, change in rhetoric and methods in foreign policy. Now, that is closely related to what was happening in Syria, because this is also the time when basically US went into a cooperation with YPG-PYD against ISIS, despite the objections from Turkey, which I think subsequently resulted in Turkey's partnering with Russia. That in turn pissed off the US more and led to kind of a serious friction within US-Turkey relations. And I think that's kind of like the background against which there is a change in policy when it comes to dealing with the PKK. I mean, militaristic methods were also used before, but because of the fact that the very Kurdish question took upon a very regional character, starting from 2014 as well, I think that kind of like showed its implications in Turkish foreign policy towards more confrontation and towards more militarization. Now, looking ahead, what would happen? I think, as Professor Uysal also mentioned it, I do not see a significant change in policy when it comes to in Syria and Iraq in terms of like deployment of militaristic methods, etc. And I think that will also go hand in hand with what will happen to the Kurdish kind of political structures within Turkey, if you will. And that, I think, also goes hand in hand with the interdynamics of the movement itself, the political structures of the Kurdish movement itself. That, for instance, already today, Selahattin Demirtas announced his retirement from active politics. So I think we have entered with the elections into a period where, as my colleague and dear friend Galip Dalay mentions, we will see a generational change in opposition politics, and that would also include the Kurdish opposition politics.
Thank you. Professor Ahmed, I want to move to foreign policy, mainly in the Arab world. I mean, after the China broker deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, there was an Arab and mainly, let's say, Gulf opening towards Syria, and this diplomacy actually was cemented with Syria's return to the Arab League and President Bashar Assad's participation in the League summit held in Jeddah. What is Turkey's position here in this issue, and how will Erdogan's re-election shape the Moscow-backed talks between Ankara and Damascus? I would like also to hear your opinion on the issue or the frozen conflict in Idlib, the return of the Syrian refugees, and also, let's say, the possibility
let's go by one by one. Each file has its own significance. As being, democratic elections, I think it was fully democratic, and Turkey is unique in this sense, achieved full, freedom of party activities and trying to attract more people. Also, the big bourgeoisie is still with the CHP, and they have all kinds of resources, media, social media, and all this. In the mainstream, of course, AK Party had some more channels active, maybe advantage, but the opposition has its own channel and also supporting channels like Fox TV and Sözcü and Halk TV, its own Habertürk. So the more advantage the opposition had, international media, Western media were, from economics to Newsweek, all the main, in global media was supportive of the, Kılıçdaroğlu. I wish they were more supportive of democracy rather than one side. And we know they support the PKK and the Western powers. They don't like to see Turkey democratic. They sing this song a lot, but we don't
we don't see this support coming from them, and they have some, they supported the Gülenists. They were expecting the coup also. I mean, we had coups and we never get enough support from the Western allies, even though they sing these democratic songs a lot. And in any case, Turkey proved itself is democratic, and also even social media. Twitter take obvious side with the Kılıçdaroğlu. Like even myself, I don't follow many of. I mean, I follow the main leaders, but I get irrelevant pro Kılıçdaroğlu, reminders and tweets, etc. So I know also, I mean, Elon Musk and others, they were sincere on this. They did not hide their, support for the opposition, which is fine. I mean, this is a global war. This is also somehow normal, but I mean, you need to convince. You don't need to convince Europeans. You need to convince your own people. And opposition had 8, maybe 10 parties to reach the public, so it is not, I think, a problem. In any case, I think it will have this election will have significant implications with the more independent Turkey, but normalized and also made opening to the Muslim and Arab world. This is very important. I think this approach was tested in the elections and it was approved, despite fear mongering against refugees and Arabs and all this. The people didn't buy this ultra-nationalist discourse. I see the rise of patriotism and kind of a conservative nationalism, but it is more related to the Turkey's global position rather than hatred against Arabs. But Kılıçdaroğlu quickly jumped from more democratic and humane type of discourse to anti-refugee discourse after the first round, and looks like it didn't play well with him. And he tried to distance himself from the HDP also, and HDP did not declare its support. They said we hate Erdogan, but we don't say, they didn't name the Kılıçdaroğlu's name as our preference, but people know, of course, people are not blind. They know their support for the. We don't know if it hurt or helped, but without like 10% clear support of votes of HDP, the Kılıçdaroğlu votes would be like under 40, and so he's being more pro-Western, let's say, American in Ukraine case and anti-Russian in some other place. With the Muharrem İnce case, Muharrem İnce blamed the Gülenists and some PKK, of course, the opposition. Kılıçdaroğlu blamed Russians for this. So this kind of questioned its credibility and stuff. So he had the kind of a challenge, difficult challenge to please many parties at the same time. But this, as I said, this opening to the Arab world and to the Middle East, this approach was tested and I think was approved. It's gonna be the same line with AK Party's opening to the Arab world will be significant. Trade, tourism, even Musalsalat Turkiye, Turkish series are very popular among the Arab public. Also, I know investments, people are investing in Turkey individually. But we also know that governments are also interested in Turkey. Interesting. One thing with this election, I think Turkey lived in this election mode for so long. Part of the economic problems, as an observer, I'm not an economic expert, but many people were almost like a year now. The start of the coalition of 6 happened about a year ago, and people were waiting for this. So this frees the investments in innovations or kind of other maybe economic activities. And I think after the elections, people now see Erdogan is there for like another 5 years and will be more easy to invest and to do some business. For the Gulf region as the question, I know Sisi also was waiting for the end of these elections, maybe to come closer with Turkey and or maybe wait for the other candidate, because when Turkey extended its hand to 3 major Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and Egypt. Emirates was the quick and more, shook Turkey's hand more strongly. Saudi Arabia was okay, but Egypt, it was a little bit more hesitant. I think they were waiting for the end of this election or the outcome of this election. I think starting with Egypt, now they'll be more eager to work with Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is also related to somehow not directly, but Lebanon with the gas deal with Israel and Greece, and they built a coalition. Israel, Egypt, and Greece built a coalition, EastMed, to prevent Turkey from this region. Turkey said no. Now it looks like things are changing toward in the favor of Turkey, and they get more because Turkey's formula is favoring also Egypt. They get Turkey defends that we should divide from the middle. A distance between the 2 continental areas to the land. We should go with demand and exclude the islands, or we give them some areas with Western logic also. But they were trying to exclude Turkey. Now they come to terms. I think Egypt came to terms, and things will be better with Egypt. And also Egypt has the Sudanese crisis now, a big headache for anybody, but especially for Egypt. And they don't want to make more problems with Turkey, let's say in Libya or Eastern Mediterranean. So this is a good positive, I think, approach will come out from this. With Saudi Arabia, I think they were also maybe waiting for the outcome. Now they see, and there is also more similarity now with Saudi Arabia becoming more independent. You mentioned the files. Sorry, Dr. Sinem, the Middle East file is so complex. I should mention some of them. Saudi Arabia, of course, became more independent, and so it is similar to Turkey's approach. So those who go in the same direction can cooperate better with Saudi Arabia, I think now, especially after the Chinese mediation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It reduces the tension in the region, which is a good thing. I personally look at it positive development, and also the government publicly supported this this normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We believe in the regional cooperation rather than regional competition or conflict. So I think we have enough problems. It is better to get over with them. And let me stop here, and I'll maybe Syria will discuss in the other one.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed. Before going to the Q&A, actually, I want also to raise a small question regarding the status or the frozen conflict of Idlib in Syria. Do you think Erdogan's re-election will further facilitate a dialogue between Syria and Turkey about Idlib?
I think, Idlib, involves Russia, involves America, and maybe the Assad regime also. But I see that Assad regime has two supervisors, Iran and Russia, and sometimes Turkey, work with the supervisors better than the Assad itself. But Russia has its own headache now in Ukraine, and the dialogue Turkey started. But I see Syria problem is an international problem, not bilateral between Turkey and Syria. I mentioned the Assad regime supervisors, the international players are there, Iran and Russia, and east of Euphrates, the PYD controls, a very valuable areas, lands, and supported by America. I see them as like American domination and proxy they are using as PYD. And of course, north of Syria is Turkey's influence there. But we want the PKK get out of the whole Syria, which requires different things. We have refugee issues. I think it was overblown, especially for Turkey. I mean, Turkey don't have a direct Syrian problem. You know, we have economic problem, but it's not directly related to Syria. And refugees also working, you know, finding jobs and working, not like the ones in Jordan or Lebanon. They are in a worse shape, and it is politicized. I think after the elections, this refugee issue will be less on the agenda. But Erdogan also announced its plan to securely and safely maybe resettle them in Syria, making preparations, building houses and stuff. So it's gonna be a slow but safe process. I think that Syria still an international issue. I think Geneva process, Astana process is not an alternative to Geneva, but this international issue will take some time. Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Sim, there was a question by one of the audience regarding the sensitive issues that pit Ankara and Washington against each other, given Erdogan's consistent determination to chart an independent course for Turkey in an increasing, let's say, a multipolar world. How do you also foresee or assess the future of relations between Turkey and US? We have the F-16 sales here, the Sweden's been to join NATO, and also maybe the future of Turkey and EU relations.
Thank you. The US, both the US-Turkey, EU-Turkey relations, I think, will not be devoid of conflicts and friction. They will continue, because especially concerning the US relations, I think there are two structural changes in the relation that would kind of continue to trigger friction. First and foremost, the US is no longer as enthusiastic as it used to during the Cold War, for instance, to strengthen Turkey in military terms. Second, I think it is also not as eager as it used to support Turkey's integration into the Western alliance. So these are, I think, two very important structural changes in the relationship. And at the same time, even though Turkey also had in the past, preceding the AKP era, had tensions with the US, be it in the 70s and later, I think there is also a significant change in the perception of Turkish political elites when it comes to the United States. And that has to do, first and foremost, 2014 US cooperation with YPG, as I said earlier, in Syria. And second, the perceived lack of support by the US, but also from the EU in the aftermath of the failed coup attempt in 2016. So I think the Turkish political class increasingly believes that it can no longer trust its traditional Western allies. So on both sides, for sometimes overlapping reasons, but to different kind of directions, there is an increasing mutual trust, which will not be easy to repair, I think. Having said that, neither for the US nor for the EU, it's an option to not to have a functioning relationship. Therefore, I think transactionalism and compartmentalization will heavily mark the relations both with the US and with the EU. With the EU, given the security imperatives because of the war in Ukraine, I think a couple of issues will be important in its relations with Turkey. And I think this is also kind of one of the motivations why, despite all the kind of suspicion about the Western countries' support to the main contender of Mr. Erdogan in the elections, the election night, I think they were quite fast and quite also a kind of celebratory of Mr. Erdogan's win. And that, I think, has mostly to do with the security imperatives of the current geopolitical moment. That being said, I think the Black Sea and its surrounding region, again, against the backdrop of the war, but also in terms of the energy, changing energy requirements because of the war, would be important in EU's relations with Turkey. Similarly, another security dimension issue would be migration and refugees that would continue to kind of mark the relations between the EU and Turkey. And last but not least, I think the kind of the climate change and related the Green Deal. But I do not necessarily see an easy kind of way forward when it comes to the Green Deal and Turkey's incorporation into that because of the ways the institutional kind of challenges in economy management unless there is a significant policy change in Turkey. And this is basically against the backdrop of the fact that still the main exporting partner of Turkey is the EU. So 40% of the exports go to the EU. So that's kind of like there is a very significant deep running economic relationship with the EU. So that would kind of, that's why I think the economy would also be an important dimension of the relationship. And just very quickly, that this should also be taught against the backdrop of the changing supply chains, etc., etc. I think that was all, no, about the question. Did I miss anything? US, Turkey, EU, Turkey. No.
Yes, thank you. There were also two small questions, and I will end. Maybe I can direct to Professor Ahmad. One is actually, you talk about the Turkey-Saudi Arabia relations a bit, but the question was also about the defense sector. If the Saudis maybe are interested to cooperate with Turkey, maybe I assume in the drone industry, though in the question it's mentioned more about the defense cooperation or there are limitations. And second, actually, question is also about, it's mentioned that do you think the recent events, the adoption of a roadmap of a Turkish-Syrian rapprochement, the decision of President Erdogan and Sisi to exchange ambassadors have been indicating a revival of strategic debt doctrine in Turkey, maybe on a wave of positive nationalism, as it is mentioned? Thank you.
Yes, I mean, it's a, good question. Let's start with of course, with the debt, but this Davutoğlu theorizing was, in practice, did not help fared very well for him in the elections. He tried to support Kılıçdaroğlu and he didn't make any depth in the support. But of course, Turkey before Davutoğlu, Erdogan's approach is to multiply, diversify the relations with the neighborhood, with the Muslim world, not only Arabs also, but for the general neighborhood with Africa also, with the Balkans and Central Asia. And this scheme, I think after causing some friction because of the Arab Spring and Turkey siding with Arab revolutions, now they are weakened and they don't, also Turkey does not see, this as a maybe hurdle now. Many changes happen with the embargo on Qatar failed, with the Sisi is there, for example. Turkey, it's not Turkey's job to change Sisi or something, to work with whatever they find in available in. So the Arab Spring tension, I think, kind of disappearing right now, and Turkey is working with anybody it's in power and present. And also Turkey's approach is to solve regional problems with more regional cooperation. This didn't work so far, but it might work in the future, where you have, for example, America is more interested in Asia with China and Ukraine, and people in the region, they can manage, or they should manage their affairs maybe by themselves. And this gives a chance now to come back again with the initial position, where you have Saudi Arabia, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and maybe sometime in the future, Iraq, for example. Of course, today we have more Iranian influence there, but things may change. In North Africa, for example, we have Algeria. Good things are improving a lot, and they have also more independent approach to many issues. And with the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries, Kuwait bought some Bayraktars, and I think Saudi Arabia is more interested in producing joint production of these defense industries, which is, I think, okay for Turkey and Also, I mean, Saudi Arabia now turned inside in, I mean, domestic development. I think Turkish companies will have a share in the construction industries, Vision 2030 and Neom cities and other investments. And also, you know, Saudis, even before the election, they deposited some money in Turkish National Bank, just like the UAE and Qatar. So things are, you know, working fine or going fine and in the right direction. And of course, we see the less problem in the region is good for us. I mean, the approach for the Turkish-Iranian rapprochement, also having solution for the Sudanese crisis, for example. We don't like this happening in a critical Red Sea region. And also see Syrian cases, crisis solved, Iraq stabilized, you know, it's our neighborhood. We have also a more depth geographical dimension that we see Iraq as a bridge to the Gulf region. So we want Iraq safe and secure and stable, plus well developed, and they have resources. They can, I mean, they can do it, and Turkey can be a partner in this developments. And there are discussions with Iraq also, not noticed, but Iraq has now a vision. This Sudani government, the new prime minister in Iraq, they want to focus on also non-oil, non-energy sectors, which is, I think, trade can be a real asset for Iraq, which is also good for Lebanon and other Arab countries, for the neighborhood. In the Saddam time, you know, many people benefit from Iraqi prosperity, and this might happen again. So, I mean, Turkey is normalizing or toning down the discourse. I mean, focusing on more constructive and more positive aspects than maybe small differences in ideas. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, on behalf of the Islam Fires Institute, I would like to thank again Professor Ahmad and Dr. Sinem for this interesting and fruitful, I can say, discussion and debate. Want to thank also everyone who attended this session, and on my behalf, I want to thank Rudaina for taking the lead to organize this event, Marina and the IFI communication team for making this event possible. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot for the invitation.
Thank you, thank you. And we can have a special Middle East discussion also.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Now Turkey become, you know, the election was interesting, and now it's over. No, let's focus on the Arab issues, maybe Middle Eastern issues.
Definitely, hopefully soon. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thanks a
Professor.
lot
Thank
for the
you.
invitation.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice day. Thank you.